Destiny's coming back in.
Oh, good.
Hey, Destiny.
Hey, we've got a
All
camera.
right, there goes the camera.
Can you hear me, hopefully?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
I can see you, man. How are
Okay.
you?
Jesus, sorry. Riverside doesn't like my computer sometimes.
But you're looking good. You're looking good. You've been communicating with Joel. Joel, thank you for setting this thing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Destiny, I promise you this is not going to be a Jubilee 2.0. It's that was quite the watch.
Yeah, listen, you can jubilee me as much as you want, okay? I'm all good for it. I'm here
Okay.
for it.
That's awesome.
It's all good. All right. So just as we get rolling, Destiny. This is Tom Wheelwright. He's the author of Tax-Free Wealth. Sold over 400,000 copies of that book. Is probably known for one of the top CPAs and known for being one of those gurus. He's worked directly with Robert Kiyosaki and has a franchise business. And you've been doing this for only 45 years, Tom. Just in this world.
Yeah.
And obviously, Destiny, you don't need much of an intro, but you're a streamer, political commentator. You're a very good debater, and it's an honor that you would take time to be on here. And the purpose of this whole conversation is really to set the stage of like, okay, there's a lot of talking points, Trump versus Harris and pros and cons. We can talk about whatever we want tonight, but the main focus is going to be from an economic and tax side of the coin. Like,
Okay.
what are the thought processes? And obviously, and again, this is kind of where I'm coming from.
While you talk, I'm gonna move my monitor real quick, but I'm still hearing you, okay?
Okay. I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and the thought process was, this like, hey, a lot of times liberals care about, social issues, but on the economy and on the tax side, they're maybe a little bit more weaker. And then vice versa. A lot of times the conversation was like, hey, Republicans don't really have a heart, but they're good for the economy. And what's interesting about you, Destiny, is like you have strong beliefs, but you also like back them up with stats, and so you can make that argument. And I think you actually would probably disagree with that. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's where I think this conversation would be really interesting. Just so you have a little bit of context on who I am, I run BetterWealth.com. We're a virtual financial planning company. We work primarily with entrepreneurs, and we're in all 50 states. So I've been doing this for a couple of years, and YouTube's more of a new thing, but it's been one of those things that I want Better Wealth to be a platform where we can have discussion. And so I'm not a political commentator at all, but I enjoy politics, but I more so enjoy the whole wealth dynamic of like how we can, like, I want the best thing for America, and I have certain beliefs around what that looks like. And so I thought you and Tom would be a really, really good conversation, and you guys might agree on some things, but I definitely think there's going to be areas that there's disagreement, which I'm excited about.
Cool. All right. Yeah, sounds good.
So the thought process would be is you guys each have up to 5 minutes to kind of set the stage on when it comes to the economy, when it comes to taxes, why you believe, in your case, I, again, don't want to put words in your mouth, but that Kamala Harris would be, and her proposal would actually be better than Trump's proposal when it comes to the American economy and all. And then I'm going to give Tom the ability to give up to 5 minutes. And then I got a bunch of questions ranging from all things from tariffs to, unrealized capital gains to some of the things that Kamala's proposed, some of the things that Trump's proposed, and we can go from there. And I want to be super respectful of your time. So if there's a time that you guys have to get up and go, I'm just grateful that you guys both took time to be here. So with that, Destiny, if you just want to start us off, you can give a brief intro if you want. I'm assuming most people know who you are, but kind of set the stage on the framework. If you had to framework why Kamala Harris when it comes to the economy and when it comes to taxes.
Yeah, so I think on a really macro perspective, I appreciate the Democrat view at the moment of the economy more than the Republican view of the economy. I feel like the Democrats have a bit more of a realistic understanding of how money works in an economy. And I feel like the Republicans have find a nicer word for delusional view of how money works. We can get as wide or as into the weeds as we want on that. On a wide view, it seems like Democrats understand that stimulating the demand side of things is incredibly important, that people need money, people need jobs, and that's as important as having suppliers that can produce goods and services for the economy. On the Republican side, I feel like we're still stuck in this weird like supply side econ world where we feel like just giving infinite tax cuts and spending infinitely with no concern for the budget, while also saying we need to have zero debt, seems to be the MO. On a finer resolution, a lot of the tax proposals that Trump has made are just kind of bizarre to me, and I don't think they would even save that much money for people. Like when we talk about, what was one? He said that you'd be able to like itemize your car loan interest. And it's like, I think at this point, it's like after the increase of the standard deduction from the initial Trump tax cuts, it's like 90% of Americans take the standard deduction. Yep. And even if you itemize, like realistically, how much interest per year are you paying on a car? And now that's like a tax, like it's just like this. We're saving like pennies or dollars. Like nobody that is qualifying for this deduction even cares about it. So yeah, I feel like on a very fine level, I feel like the proposals from Trump are very kind of bizarre and weird and nonsensical. And then on a macro level, I just don't know what the vision for the economy is of the Conservative Party at the moment. Yeah.
And then what would you say to Harris? Like what about her or what she's proposed or what Joe Biden's done for the last 3.5 years have you liked from a standpoint of what they're proposing?
It's a little bit hard to compare, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm going to come off as very politically biased, but it's hard to compare right now because I feel like there's only one party that really talks much about policy right now. So it's hard to like compare, what could a world look like otherwise if policy debate was more what we did when it came to the economy. As far as saying good things, I think that we did do a good amount of stimulus for the economy. I know that people complain about inflation, but we were potentially facing, economic ruin. And I know that we are outperforming, the G7, I think the entire OECD when it comes to inflation in our economy. So despite how much of a problem people think inflation is, we're doing better than every other country. So I think the spending there was good. I think that allocating money for things like infrastructure, I'm glad that got passed. That's like a political and economic thing. As far as trying to take care of citizens that might have children, so things like the child tax credit, expanding that, I think that those types of income redistribution programs are good for people. I feel like in general, I'm not a big fan of the answer to everything is just plug in more money. So I'm a little critical of the $15,000 first time homebuyer tax credit. Obviously that's going to be a big upward pressure on prices. I'm not a big fan of just money for everything, but I think things like the child tax credit and the expansion of that, I think these are worthwhile things. And I think investment in infrastructure and the American economy, I think is good too. So yeah.
We're definitely going to talk about the $25,000 proposed tax credit for new home. So all right, Tom, the same question to you when it comes to, and you can give a little bit of your philosophy. I'm assuming, Destiny, you're not familiar with Tom's book, Tax-Free Wealth, and any of his background. So Tom, feel free to give a little bit of paint that picture, but then also when it comes to economy, when it comes to you're working with value creators and business owners and all day long. And so just what's your perspective as it relates to that?
Well, first of all, the first thing to realize is the tax law has become, since John F. Kennedy, primarily a series of incentives, right? And so the tax law acts as incentives for certain activities. And I think, Destiny, you hit it right on the head, is that the Democrats have decided that the incentives need to fall heavily on the consumption side and the consumer side, whereas the Republicans have decided that the incentives need to fall heavily on the investment side. And that is a fact. In fact, that's the primary difference between the two tax proposals is if you look at the Democratic side, they actually want to take down investment and take the money from investors through higher capital gains taxes, through higher corporate tax rates, through higher estate taxes, through eliminating 1031 exchanges. They want to take those dollars and give them to people who would consume those dollars, which I don't have an argument like the child tax credit. Are there some good parts of that? Absolutely. On the other hand, I believe that Harris's plan will put a lot of upward pressure on inflation. And I think inflation is the worst tax we have. It is the most regressive tax we have. It hits poor and middle class the most. And if you take $4 to $8 trillion from the investments and you put it into consumption, it's a little like feeding the economy sugar. And while, yes, it will stimulate in the short run, what will it do in the long run? And in the long run, what we saw from the 2020 and 2021, the big stimulus packages, the general public stimulus packages, is we saw this upward pressure, too much money chasing too few goods. And so you have to have this combination of, you've got to have the money in there, but you have to have the goods. And just this week, there was a report on the economy. You were right. You're right. We are outperforming other economies in the world. But what also was in that report is that only 20% of the GDP came from production. 80% came from consumption. And the question is, how long can you consume and not run out of supply, not put upward pressure on the price of goods? So generally speaking, the Republicans are very heavy on the investment side. The Democrats are very heavy on the consumption side. That's not to say that there aren't some consumption sides of Trump's proposals, not taxing tips, not taxing overtime, which I don't like either of those proposals personally. And Harris has proposed increase in the low-income housing tax credit, which I think is a terrific proposal, and actually adding a neighborhood development tax credit, low-income housing tax credit, and those are investment type initiatives. But most of Harris's initiatives land in the consumer and the consumption area.
So this is pretty much the question I have as it relates to, like, okay, the liberal talking point versus maybe the conservative talking point comes down to, all right, should we give incentives to the consumer / worker, or to the corporations, to the people, the small business owners? And Destiny, how do you go about framing that question and thought process? Because obviously that's really like, it's like tax the rich, tax the rich. And again, sometimes I look at that as like, why are we taxing and trying to go after the people that are creating the jobs in the first place?
So I would say that if we look at like George W. Bush's economic policy, or if we go to like kind of neoconservatism and we look at their positions on like corporatism or immigration, we could have that conversation. But I don't agree right now that Republicans are trying to defend the supply side of the economy. One of the big concerns I think that people should have from a finance and economics point of view of the country right now is, it used to be that you would have conservatives fighting on the supply side and you would have Democrats fighting on the demand side, and then hopefully we would settle out somewhere in the middle. But now we have just the Conservative Party from a financial point of view is wholly separated from reality. So I don't take very seriously the idea that the Conservative Party is concerned with the supply side when Donald Trump is talking about like a 20% across the board tariff, which would just be an unmitigated disaster when it comes to supply. Or when we look at supplies, like for instance, like supply of labor, right? Labor is one of your most important productive inputs for your economy. And Trump is talking about deporting anywhere from 12 to 20 million people. When we talk about things like consumption versus supplying, these are complicated affairs as well. So for instance, a lot of people are under the incorrect assumption, the intuitive one, that having a very strong currency is good, for instance, right? I want the dollar to be strong. Having a strong currency is very good when it comes to importing because I can buy a lot of stuff. Having strong currency is really rough when you're exporting because now our stuff is more expensive. And the USD has been gaining a lot of strength. Aren't we at like a 25-year high or something against the euro? So there are a lot of other things, other markets that are playing into our consumption versus our production, like our imports versus our exports. I mean, like that's kind of an international trade, I guess, is kind of another leg of this. But I guess to come back and center it, I don't feel like conservatives are very much the party of supply side help right now. They're stuck in this weird populist world where it feels like they're attacking everybody, when Donald Trump's only policy is like this sledgehammer of massive tariffs for everything and then irrelevant tax deductions for like overtime and wages and car interest payments, I guess.
So I have a question for you, Destiny. So you don't see the 2017 Tax Act as a supply side tax proposal with all of the incentives, reducing the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21, which Kamala wants to increase to 28. reducing the tax on entrepreneurs by 20%.
So I guess I'm kind of curious because I don't know how this. I guess I haven't like done research on this or whatever. But wouldn't if you cut the corporate tax rate, wouldn't that lead to a decrease in supply side production?
No, it always results in an increase because you have corporations aren't people, right? Corporations now have more money to reinvest into supply. Basically, reinvest into equipment, reinvest into innovation. That's where they have more money if they don't have such a high tax rate.
Well, isn't that not really true though? Like if I'm let's say that I own a business, right? And I'm looking for projects with a high NPV plus, right? I'm looking for a net present value plus project to invest in. Let's say that we live in a world hypothetically where the corporate tax rate is 99%, okay? That means that if I have $1,000 in profit for my business, if I can invest in any project that just doesn't lose me 99% of my money, I'm basically like making money, right? Because the profit tax is so high that I'm encouraged to basically invest my money into reinvest in my business no matter what. Whereas if the corporate tax rate comes down to 1%, well, that NPV plus project has to be pretty lucrative now because I can have absolutely no corporate taxes. I just have to pay my personal income tax on whatever gets withdrawn from my company. So I feel like, I don't know if I agree, unless there's like a plug in there that I'm missing, that like a high corporate tax rate, because it would only apply to profits, not revenues, right? So why would that necessarily discourage reinvestment? If anything, I feel like it would encourage reinvestment because you'd be trying to avoid the tax rate there.
Why would you reinvest? Why would you even undertake a business if there's no possibility of profits? Because the government takes
but you don't get taxed.
Why would you do something? Why would an entrepreneur entrepreneurs take all the risk, they put all the money, they put in all of their sweat, blood, and tears. Why would they do that? If the government were going to take all the money out, I mean, would you do it? I wouldn't do it.
Well, not take all the money, but I mean, like.
Well, 99% is all the money.
Well, sure.
There's nothing left over.
I'm obviously 99% would be an extreme hyperbolic example, but I'm saying like if the corporate tax rate were 20%, I would still be incentivized to make money from a business because it's better than just being employed, right? But if the corporate tax rate is 20%, when I'm going to invest in future projects, I'm accounting for that corporate tax rate, right? I'm probably trying to avoid stuff in the profit margin as much as possible, and I'm probably trying to reinvest or expense out most of that money. So wouldn't like a slightly higher tax rate to some extent encourage reinvestment versus having a 0% tax rate?
No, that's the opposite, because tax by definition is a drag. In the dictionary, to tax something is to put a drag or a weight on it.
Yeah, but what are we taxing?
Well, you're taxing corporate profits. So by doing that, you're putting a drag on the amount of money that they have to reinvest. Remember, and again.
Well, wait, but if you reinvest the money, it's not a profit, right?
Is how do you define corporate profits? Okay, so that's actually a very big question. Okay, so for example, the Republicans want to bring back full expensing of equipment. Okay, that means that if you spend $1 on equipment, you don't have to pay tax on that dollar you spent. But if you didn't have that, if you had a long-term depreciation rate, say 10 years, then you'd actually spend $100 and you'd only get to deduct 10. Okay, and you get to deduct 10 a year. But what that does is it actually reduces the incentive. Now, the Democrats, with John F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy actually was the first one to incentivize investment in equipment. He enacted the 10% investment tax credit for that same reason.
Wait, depreciation schedules can be important. I might not want to take a full deduction up front for a particular thing. I might want to depreciate that on a schedule over some number of years.
Right. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want your money later instead of today?
Well, because if they're...
Under what math does that work?
I mean, I guess it depends on the type of business we're talking about, right? If we say, for instance, if we're talking,
doesn't.
What?
No, well, it doesn't because here's the thing. So the more money I have, the more money I can invest. Okay, investment, and in fact, all production is a matter of mass. Okay, how much mass do I have to invest? That's why the rich get richer, because they have more mass. Okay, and that is actually the argument against not taxing the rich more, frankly. Okay, but if you have more money, you can invest more. The faster you have the money, the faster you have the money, the more money you have to invest, and every you have more money to invest.
Yeah, but hold on, the tax
for it. If you wait for it, then you don't have the money.
So, okay. So let's say theoretically, let's say that I have if I say that I've got like a pass-through or flow-through entity, right? You understand that the entity itself isn't taxed, but it flows through to my taxes,
Sure.
right? So if I am working with an LLC and I've got some kind of pass-through entity, let's say that I purchase something, and let's say that I purchase an asset for $1 million, right? My goal in depreciating that on a schedule would be, I don't want to take a massive depreciation for this year and pay no tax and then not carry that forward to the future years, because on a progressive tax system, if I can knock dollars out of that top tax bracket every single year, that's more valuable than just doing, in some cases, than just doing an upfront full depreciation like instantaneously, right?
Yeah, I love it when I hear other people talk about tax planning. That's awesome, because that's what I do for a living. But in principle, okay, you're right. Are there times when you're going to manage your tax deductions? Absolutely. But the general rule is, I want my money now, because I can invest that money. Because not only can I invest that money now, I can actually leverage that money with the bank's money or investors' money, and I can actually get an even higher rate of return. And so what it does is it increases the velocity of my money, and I get a higher and higher rate of return.
So I understand what you're saying I understand what you're saying in kind of a simple sense, in that, like, I want my money now so that I can leverage it. But if we're talking about like corporate business stuff, or if we're getting into higher dollar amounts, you don't need money to leverage it. You just need an asset, or you need future cash flows, right? So if I can do certain types of tax strategizing where I am optimizing for future cash flows, and one of the ways to do that would be to minimize my overall tax footprint over a large period of time, rather than just taking a whole huge upfront deduction, right? Why would I ever want to tax deduct stuff that's in like the bottom income bracket, right? I have no desire to do that, right? But there's ways for me to gain access to other people's capital and investments that just revolve around like the valuation of my company, future potential cash flows, other assets that I might have that don't need me to just have a bunch of cash right now, right? That's like the lowest level of like investment or leveraging, right? Is I have cash and like let me leverage it, right?
Well, so let's go back to the corporate tax rate. Corporate tax rate's a flat tax rate. It's not a graduated rate. There's no graduated rate in the corporate tax rate. And so when you propose increasing that rate or decreasing the amount of deductions, you are putting a drag on the investments that are possible in corporations. Now remember, yes, you're talking about pass-throughs, and that's an individual graduated tax rate. And there are points where, in fact, it's the 20% point typically, where if you get below 20%, you probably are good, right? 20% is a good tax rate to be paying. If I pay less than that, then I may be giving up future tax benefit, maybe. Okay. Sure. However, in the corporate world, that's not the case. And remember, all small businesses, they have the right to use the corporate rate. They don't have to use the pass-through rate. Everybody can use the corporate rate, not just the big businesses. So my point is that, look, if you have a flat rate, then absolutely you want your money now. You absolutely do not want to wait. Okay. If you have a graduated rate, there are rare circumstances. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for 45 years. It's rare that I see somebody who doesn't want to take the deduction now and wants to postpone it. Because you're also assuming that I'm going to put all my money back into investment, when the reality is I'm going to take some of that money out because I need to live on it if I'm an entrepreneur. And that money's going to be taxed. And I'm going to get my 20% tax rate just on the money that I need to take out to live on.
Sure.
I don't want to have to pay. I don't want to have to pay taxes.
Can I ask a question on that?
40%
I don't know, because I don't have a C corp for my my corporation is structured like a C corporation. When you say you have to take out money now in order to live off of it, if you the money that you would take from a C corp, wouldn't you W-2 yourself and just pay that out as an expense to the business? Would the corporate tax rate be applied to money that you pay yourself in W-2?
So in a C corp, you're right. You would take it out. Probably, if you could, you take it out as salary, because if you take it as a dividend, our current tax system doesn't allow a deduction for dividends, which is, by the way, a horrible idea. We should be allowing a deduction for dividends.
Sure. So like you shouldn't be living off of your business profits. Ideally, you pay yourself a wage if you're part of a business, right?
But an entrepreneur who has a flow-through tax is living off their business profits. They're not taking everything out in salary. They are living off their business profits.
Sure, but if it's a flow-through, then you're not, corporate taxes don't apply anyway, right? LLCs, S corporations.
Right.
But let me get back to the individual tax rate. So if you're assuming, so we go upwards to a 40% tax rate, right? Well, the 20% tax rate applies to the amount of money that you would take out to live on. It doesn't apply to the money you would leave in. The money you're leaving in is at the higher tax rate. So what I'm suggesting is that's a drag. And I'd rather see the expensing. I'll give you a perfect example. In 2017, the Trump tax bill did something that very few people actually even know to this day exists. And it allows small businesses to deduct their inventory currently. Okay? In other words, they don't have to wait until they sell it. Well, why is that a big deal? Because small businesses that are growing were actually going out of business because of taxes, because they put their money back in inventory. It's not deductible. They don't have the cash, but they have to pay the tax. Okay, so they're reinvesting in inventory to grow their business, but that inventory wasn't deductible. Now it's deductible. Now they can actually have the money to reinvest in the inventory. But if they have to use the money to pay taxes, they don't have the money to reinvest.
What, can you just help me? Because I'm just trying to understand. If I'm growing inventory for my business, am I paying taxes on the money that I'm spending to increase the size of my inventory?
Yes, you are, unless you meet this exception that Trump put into effect in 2017. Yes, you are.
Okay.
So take a big corporation, take Apple, for example. Is Apple paying tax on the money they put back in inventory? Absolutely.
And when we say inventory here, we're talking about like purchases from like other manufacturers and stuff, I'm guessing? Or
well, we're talking about everything that you have in stock. So that could anywhere from parts to finished goods, anything that you have in stock. That's inventory.
I think here's a question. Destiny, are you familiar with how the QBI tax credit works for pass-through entities?
Can you explain it to me? What does it stand for?
Yeah, Tom, why don't you explain? And then the question is,
that's the
are you in
qualified
favor
business
of this?
income deduction. So as part of the 2017 Act, in order to basically compensate smaller businesses who don't have a corporate tax rate, just like you're talking about, Destiny, they put into place a 20% deduction off the top. Okay, so in other words, a business only pays 80% on its income, where an individual pays tax on 100% of their income. But a business only pays tax on 80% of their income. It effectively lowered the top rate from 37% to 29.6%. That's what it did. Okay, for business income. That's the point of that. And so the idea of that is, let's get to a lower rate right off the bat, closer to a corporate rate, but still it's still basically a 9% difference.
Are you, Destiny, are you in favor? Because if nothing happens, it's going to sunset, and pretty much
goes away.
If Kamala Harris gets in, it's probably not going to be renewed. If Trump gets in, he's already said that he wants to renew everything that he, with the Tax and Jobs Cuts Act. So what is your thoughts around that? Because almost every small business owner that we serve takes advantage of that. And whether it's true or not, they're under the belief that they're better off, like they have more money.
It's a big deal for a small business.
It's a big deal, and the reason it was put in is so that the little guy, the pass-through businesses like all of ours, got the same sort of benefit that corporations got.
I guess I would have to be more informed in terms of how this QBI works, so like what it actually applies to. I guess here's maybe a different question. It's less specific. Are you in favor of lower taxes for pass-through businesses, even that make more than $400,000 in net profit? Or like, what do you believe, like what tax rate should that be? Because I guess that I would just love to hear your thoughts around taxation when it comes to people in business.
Business income.
Sure.
That's a good question.
I mean, on the most macro level, I think that the tax rate for a society should be such that you can ideally afford the majority of your budget every year, right? So we've got some level of programs that we want to fund, and we fund that through taxation. Whether that taxation comes more from businesses versus individuals, to be 100% honest, I don't think I've ever even been sold on the concept of a corporate tax. I don't know if it's something that is like more productive than just taxing income, just period. I'm not entirely sure on that. So, but I don't know enough. Like, I don't know what like the Laffer curve theoretical appointment should be for the corporate tax rate to optimize your cash flows from tax receipts from corporations. I'm just not sure. And then you've got like huge corporations that are very investment heavy and growing a ton. They just end up paying no corporate tax anyways because all of their money goes back into reinvestment. So there are no profits to tax. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have like strong opinions one way or the other about corporate taxes. I would have to see like paperwork really believe that like a lot of these tax breaks are helping small businesses. I just don't believe it that much. I feel like people just want to take home more money because at the end of the day, like I've never hired or fired or thought about any part of my business because of the tax rates. If anything, higher taxes seem to spur on that investment a little bit more because I know that if I reinvest it's just revenue and then I can expense it out instead of paying taxes on it. But there might be some types of businesses like I don't hold inventory, I don't sell products like that. There might be like paperwork that I could see where it's like, oh, I can see how this like tax break would help significantly here. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what programs do you want to fund and then what's the best way to raise the money for it. Yeah.
But what's your opinion? Because is it a bad thing that people get wealthy in America?
Is it a bad? No, I don't think so at all. No. I think America is amazing for that.
So can I ask you a question, Destiny? So I have two questions. First of all, are you familiar with the global minimum tax that they proposed in the OECD?
Yeah, I think GMT, the idea, I'm familiar conceptually at a very high level with it, but I couldn't get into the weeds about it. I think that the idea is that you want to equalize some global tax rate around the world so there's not like these tax haven like incentives like in Ireland.
Well,
right?
it actually would operate to make sure that American companies don't get all of those tax benefits and pay a minimum 15% tax rate. Okay, so they would pay tax and it actually go into, I honestly can't even tell you where it goes because, but it goes to other countries. It doesn't go to the U.S. Okay, they would pay this minimum tax rate, so they would not effectively get all of those tax benefits, including all of the write-offs of their equipment. So I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I think I don't like the idea of countries making a lot of money off of tax rates. So I'm not necessarily opposed to like some kind of global minimum tax if it means that there aren't countries that are just making a ton of money because they happen to have favorable rates. I think it's a little silly to, have an office in Delaware and to say that this is like where your business is somehow, earning money through or the Irish tax stuff. Like I think that's kind of silly. So I'm not opposed to global corporate or global like minimums or whatever, or some way to prevent like financial exits from countries for that. But like maybe that could be done in other ways too, that make it, you like penalize people that do business out of the country and try to like bring the money back or something. I don't know. Maybe a GMT isn't the best way to do it.
Or incentivize people to bring money in the country like they did in the 2017 Act. They brought $2 trillion back into the country.
Sure, I think there are good ways to incentivize ways to bring things, but you agree, right? There are bad ways to incentivize money coming back to a country, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And we're never going to get rid of tax havens. It's not possible to get rid of tax havens as long as we have high taxes. One thing that's been interesting is since 2017, the global tax rate has come down across the board. And so it's been a bit of a race to the bottom, which is not necessarily a bad thing because that helps the entire world's economy, not just the U.S. economy. So that was one thing. But I wanted to go back to Caleb's question, which is Harris and Biden have proposed significant tax increases on investors. Okay, start with the capital gains tax, an increase to 33%, 28% rate plus a 5% net investment income tax, which is just basically a 33% tax rate, okay, which is a 60% tax increase from the capital gains rate, which, and then also proposed other tax increases on capital assets, like the unrealized capital gains tax, like the corporate income tax actually is an investment tax that way because it means that your stock portfolio probably loses value if the corporation's paying more money to taxes as opposed to having more money available for reinvestment or paying out. That's it. I get your shrug there.
And the only reason I shrug, like I agree with you, like in the micro, but obviously in the macro, right? The argument would be that they might be losing a little bit of value out of their portfolio because of the taxes that are being directly paid, but then they might be gaining value in their portfolio because more consumers have money to buy products from the company, right? It's like a back and forth, ideally, right?
Okay. All right. I get where you're going there.
Yeah.
So I am curious, though, about your thoughts on particularly increasing taxes on investment income, like capital gains taxes, like taxing gifts as capital gains, taxing estates for capital gains and estate tax, eliminating 1031 exchanges, which are the like-kind exchanges on real estate, so you don't have to pay tax when you sell real estate as long as you buy more real estate. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Depreciation goes away altogether after, or 100% depreciation.
No, the bonus depreciation does. We go back to what we've had for basically 40 years.
Yeah, so I think the question is.
But I'm most interested in the increase in the rates.
Yeah.
The capital gains rates. I mean, for example, let me give you an example. So let's say that you're a business owner, and you put all your money in your business. That this is your retirement. You don't have 401k because you're putting your money back in your business. This is basically your retirement. And when you retire, you sell that, and now you have a 33% tax rate because you're going to recognize all that in 1 year. You don't get to take it over a number of years. Like if an employee puts their money into a 401k, they're going to pull that out and be taxed on it. In those lower marginal rates that you talked about earlier, they're going to be taxed on that as they pull it out. Whereas the business owner, because now, okay, so let's say it's $1 million, which is what Harris has proposed, but you sell your business for $3 million, that $2 million is going to be subject to that 33% tax, which is quite a bit higher than if they'd been able to take it over their retirement years like an employee does. So I am curious as to how what you think about those increases in capital gains rates.
I guess at the end of the day, like I said, it all comes down to like managing government spending with government income. And if this is one of the ways that they can make more money by taxing capital gains a bit more, then I mean, like we said earlier, right? In terms of the Laffer curve, right? There's going to be some level of taxation that discourages heavily any future investment. There's going to be some level of taxation that too low discourages future cash flows to the government, right? Like if we had a 5% capital gains tax, you could probably raise it to 6% and people would invest just as much, right? You could probably raise it to 7%, people would invest a lot. Would a 28%, would a 5-point gain, a 5-point increase on the capital gains tax discourage investment? I guess the question is...
It's a 10-point gain, not a 5-point gain.
10-point? Okay. What would be the, I guess, like what else would the money go into? I'm not sure. I don't know.
So so statistically, historically, as I've looked at these numbers, 28% is the maximum capital gains rate you can have before you're significantly discouraging investment. But if you think right now, most people have a 28% capital gains rate because they have a 23.8% federal rate and they have a 4 to 5% state rate. So they're already at that peak. So if you look at, for example, Tax Foundation runs lots of numbers on this, and what they show is that you get over that level, just like you're suggesting, you get over that level, you actually bring less money into the government. So one of my points is, it seems like, and maybe I'm misreading this, but it seems like there is this need for the Democrats to raise taxes on the rich for the sake of looking like they're raising taxes on the rich, whether or not it actually increases the revenue to the government.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the question could be, if taxes are going up on the capital gains rate, like if they are bumped 5 or 10 points, what is the alternative? What's that money being spent on anyway? Like, what would people invest in instead?
You mean what would they do with that? Well, they're going to give that money to the government. What do you mean?
They'd be spending that money.
What?
It's the same concept of giving deductions.
The argument is that a higher tax rate, a higher capital gains tax is going to discourage investment. But if the money is not being invested, what would they do with the money otherwise?
Well, so they're not going to have them. So what you're saying is well, here's what's going to happen. You're not going to sell the asset. So what you do is you take liquidity out of the marketplace, because if I'm going to be taxed when I sell it, and of course, this is why Harris wants this unrealized capital gains tax, right? This is actually the reason she wants that capital gains tax, is because by increasing the capital gains tax rate from an effective 24% to a 33% rate, okay, which is the proposal, then what you're doing is you're saying, well, look, maybe I should just hold on to it, and I won't sell it, and I won't have transactions, which takes liquidity out of the marketplace, which actually depresses the marketplace because you don't have buyers and sellers.
Sure. So I definitely agree with you there, and I think that's a huge problem. But I don't agree that that's a problem with increasing a theoretical tax rate. I think that's just a lock-in problem from taxing at the point of sale. And I feel like in an odd way, taxing unrealized gains would probably increase liquidity in markets because there's no longer as much of a lock-in function if you're being forced to step up the tax basis year after year because, well, now fuck it, like I've already paid taxes on this investment, even though I haven't sold it, I might as well, if it, like right now, right, if we're looking for investment opportunities, let's say that I have $1 million sitting in some taxable asset and my tax basis in that is 50 grand, right? Well, when I go to invest in any other opportunity, I have to imagine that I'm about to suck $950,000 of appreciation out and I'm gonna have to pay, I don't care if it's 28%, 38%, whatever, I'm about to lose a quarter of my money. So I'm locked in like crazy. But if I have to pay a step up in basis every year or whatever, however you would do that to increase that, then the lock-in effect disappears. But I don't know if like 33 or 35% is significantly more lock-in than 25%. I don't know if I'm fully convinced on that. I think that lock-in is a problem, but I think that has more to do with how we treat the tax basis of investments.
I mean, you know, when they run the numbers, it actually is. You know, when they run all the models, it is significant. But you do, of course, now open the door to the unrealized capital gains tax, which, Caleb, I know you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, this was the point I wanted to get to, so I'm glad Destiny brought it up. Yeah. I think he just opened it up, like unrealized capital gains. Destiny kind of made the point
So let's talk about this. First of all, it's very, I'm going to say, this is one of the worst proposals out there. It is. It's really, you know, I know you hate the tariffs. I hate the unrealized capital gains tax, and I hate it for a number of reasons. One is that you are taking an enormous amount. Remember, when you take money out of the investment class and you put it into the consumption, then what you're doing is that you are you're reducing the amount that's being invested long term, and you're putting it into short-term consumption, which, yes, it's like a sugar high. Okay, so that's what goes on. The worst part of the unrealized capital gains tax, though, is it is completely unmanageable, and it's such a disincentive to do anything. It's a complete disincentive.
Yeah, well, hold on. We need to, when we talk about incentives, we have to compare these things to other things, right? Let's say that I live in an environment where, I am taxed at 5% if I invest in a particular thing, okay? That appreciates at 100% per year. And let's say that all of the other investment opportunities around me appreciate at 2% per year. It doesn't matter if you triple or quadruple my tax. My overall gains, my index is going to be way higher investing in that ultra profitable opportunity rather than investing in less taxed other things. So like when we talk about how the tax will increase and it'll disincentivize one thing, what we should be talking about, you have to, what else is the money going towards? This is what I was saying earlier when I'm saying, like, let's say that I have $1 million invested and the capital gains tax goes up, or let's say I have $1 million to invest and the capital gains tax goes up. It's not like I'm just not investing my money. It's not like all of a sudden it's a good idea to keep my money in the bank. Yeah, my tax rate might go up on my appreciated asset, but I'm still making money, right? As opposed to just sitting there losing money to inflation or whatever, or I guess like hoarding treasury bonds. So there has to be some other place where the money is going if we're disincentivizing things. Because at the end of the day, tax rates and profits and all of these things are just competing for what is your good investment opportunity. And all of these things are factors in that, I think. Yeah.
But you're presuming that there's just as much money to invest, when in fact, when you're taxing it, there isn't as much money to invest. And so now what I have to do is I have to spend a higher proportion of my money on consumption than I do in investment. And there's not that investment going back into the economy. There's not that investment going back into production. I mean,
how is there not?
Look at the top. Look at the top 4 or 5 incentives in the U.S. tax code right now. There's 4 or 5 of them, okay? The first one's business. You mentioned it several times. If I put my money back into my business, I don't have to pay tax on that money, okay? The second would be technology, which Trump wants to bring back the research and development deduction, which is a huge need, by the way. in our country. The fact that it went away is a really horrible disadvantage us versus the rest of the world that has much better tax incentives for research and development. But then go to real estate, okay? Look at how much housing has been built in the since 2017, in large part because of the additional incentives to invest in real estate through the bonus depreciation. And then you look at energy. What did Biden do in 2022? The big bill was the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, what was the main part of that? Well, that was in energy, renewable energy incentives. Those are tax incentives, credits and deductions. And then and then you've got fossil fuel tax incentives, and then you have agricultural incentives, which are probably the biggest incentives that there are in the tax law, are agricultural tax incentives. Because here's what the government wants. They want us to produce housing, they want us to produce food, they want us to produce energy, and they want us to produce jobs. And so that's where those incentives go, okay? But if you take the money out of those incentives, you have less money going in. And again, it's this mass problem. It's like compound interest works really well the fifth, sixth, seventh time you compound it, but it works terrible the first time you compound it.
Why do we? You keep saying we're taking money out. Can you explain what you mean?
You're taking the money from the investors and you're putting it into consumers.
Wait. Because do the consumers set it on fire? Where does the money go next?
So you're assuming it's going right back to the rich people.
But yeah, if a poor person gets money from the government via taxation and then they spend that money, they're probably spending it in places that are like heavily capitalized by capital owners, right?
Well,
yes, but that's like saying, okay, a sugar calorie is just as valuable as a protein calorie or a vegetable calorie. They have different values, okay? And this is your argument, I presume, is that you can't just rely on supply side, which I agree. You've got to have consumption, but what's that proportion? That's my question. What's the proportion of investment versus consumption? If it's all consumption, here's what happens. The biggest problem is inflation. Because what happens is that, remember, the people who are investing, they have extra money, okay? So, and that's the argument for taxing them, because they have extra money, so they can afford to do it. They can, okay? That's a fact. They can afford to do it. The challenge is that you're taking that money, it's like selling your gold supplies, okay? You're taking that money, and now what you're doing is you're consuming it, which means that you're pushing up heavy on the demand side, but you're not increasing the supply side because you're taking money out of the supply side. So at the same time you're taking money out of the supply side, you're adding to the demand side, which is natural inflationary pressure.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a balance, right? We have to talk about both ends, right? Because we can also
right, it is a balance.
You want some? Hold on, wait. We all remember the graph, right? Our quantity produced, quantity supplied, right? Not all of those pressures are necessarily bad, right? Having people that are willing to pay more for certain goods or services can increase on the supply side the willingness to produce a given good or service, right? At a quantity demanded, more will be produced at a higher price paid. So the idea, I feel like it's just when you talk about when you remove money from one area and give it into another, you're talking about all the potential negatives, which are true, right? Removing money from investment can be bad. We want to capitalize our businesses. Giving an infinite amount of money to create upward pressure on demand could be bad. You're increasing inflation. You're making things less affordable. But every single economic transaction has another side to it, right? If you've got some guy who has $1 billion invested in his company and his tax basis for this is like $1 million, one, whatever the tax rate is, we haven't realized any of it from the government, right? And two, who's to say that the money is better off not even being taxed versus you tax the money from him, you pour it into people that are going to consume. When people go to Walmart and they buy goods and services, I mean, where does the money ultimately end back up in, right? And the suppliers that are now going to be expanding stores, hiring more workers, not to mention the social goods from giving people money so they can consume things and increase their standards of living and everything else. And yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Obviously, again, I said Laffer curve like 50 times, right? There's going to be an ideal level of taxation that we have to talk about, but we can't just pretend that all of these transactions are just bad on one side and good on the other, right?
I totally agree. My question for you then is, what I'm hearing from you, tell me I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is you think it's imbalanced right now, and that we need to rebalance it by actually increasing the demand side and decreasing the supply side. That's what I'm hearing.
I don't know if that's right? I mean, I'm not going to. I can't seriously debate like macroeconomics. It's going to be difficult for me, right? But I mean, my understanding is as long as the inflation is around 2%, we can stimulate the demand side a bit more. As long as unemployment is below 5.5%, right? I mean, like the Federal Reserve has its two targets, and that's kind of how it conducts monetary policy. And as long as our stuff is staying there, then pumping the supply side and the demand side is good. But we look at our government budget next to say, okay, well, what's going on? If we're overspending like crazy, which everybody seems to do, Trump included, well, then maybe we need to tax a little bit more, right?
Or spend a little less.
Yeah, because again, like even something you said. Even something you said earlier, you mentioned something about how when tax rates are lower, like the growth is higher. Well, that's a bit of that's a sneaky statement. I'm not saying you're intentionally saying something wrong, but like when people said, for instance, that the Trump tax cuts spurred on the economy, that's true, of course. It's deficit spending. You would expect it to. Trump cut a whole bunch of tax receipts from the government, but continued to spend. But it's not fair that Trump gets to take credit for what's essentially deficit spending and say, well, the reason why is because we gave suppliers more money. You did, but you did it by not only allowing them to keep more money, but in a roundabout way, you're stimulating the demand side as well by continuing to spend at an exorbitant rate for the government as well, right? There's always like two sides to all of these transactions that everybody seems to ignore. Trump was just as much a demand side stimulator as any supply side alleviator because he deficit spent at record levels even before COVID.
Well, before COVID, his deficits were not nearly as big as they are right now under Biden.
That's true, coming at it, but Biden has an excuse, right?
Biden has an excuse. What's his excuse? His excuse is, here's the problem, and I want to get just to this, and I really appreciate you bringing this up. His excuse is, we have inflation. Okay, so because we have inflation, we have higher interest rates, and it's the higher interest rates that are causing that deficit to be so high. And the higher interest rates do, in fact, have a huge impact on the deficit. Okay, but where do the higher deficits come from? They come from the higher spending of the 2021, the March 2021 American Rescue Plan and the Trump 2020. Okay, both of those. Neither one of those, my opinion, just in my opinion, were necessary to stimulate the economy. Both of them pushed demand side up without taking into account that we had this huge supply side disruption caused by COVID.
Sure.
Okay.
There's just two quick facts on that. So one, you can say that they weren't necessary. I don't know if what we're competing against is a legendary, hypothetical, mystical version of America. We are outperforming every other country when it comes to inflation. So if we say that we could have done even better, that's fine. But you're talking about going from rank 1 to rank like super 1. Like the reality is whatever financial stimulus we did, which was higher than every other country in the world except I think Japan, it clearly helped us to some extent because we are buoying off like inflation better than every other country. Number one. Number two, Donald Trump's pre-COVID deficits were still larger than Biden's current deficits, even with COVID. Trump had no excuse to run deficits at that level prior to COVID. His economy was booming. Everybody involved in the markets and watching the GDP knew this. Why, if Trump was going to spend that crazy with no crisis, who's to say he wouldn't spend even more insane now, still after COVID, with inflation being high, or the year over year at least, the cumulative being high?
So prior to COVID, his deficits were lower than Biden's.
His spending,
his deficits were lower.
My understanding is
I'm
that
not saying his spending were, but his deficits were lower.
It wasn't his spending at that point was the highest it had been in U.S. history for deficits, right? Before COVID, right?
It was higher, but Biden has far surpassed him.
Sure, but
we're at $2 trillion this year.
Do what?
We're at $2 trillion for the first time this year in an annual deficit.
Sure, but again, it's in a post-COVID environment, right? So there's
right, but we're 2 years post-COVID. We're not 6 months post-COVID. We're 2 years post-COVID. And my point is, so here's what I want to get back to, if I can, Destiny. I appreciate your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Is that if you have this, you're putting all this money in, and you're going to get inflation. Because what I heard is that some inflation may be fine. It may be fine if you get inflation. The Federal Reserve, they've been very clear that their job is not to deal with spending. It's not the demand side from a spending standpoint. In other words, that's the government's job.
Sure.
Their job is to, their job is two things only. One is interest rates, interest rates and employment. So
sure. Oh, to be clear, just so everybody knows, when you say
inflation
spending, you're talking about the government spending, right?
Yeah, government spending.
Yep.
Right. So inflation and inflation, they want to bring inflation down, and they want to balance that with employment. Right. That's their two mandates, according to them. Okay, so what happens if you get this upward pressure on inflation that we're talking about now? What happens is that now you get higher interest rates. What happens with higher interest rates? Now, you're going to get severe disruption in the economy. I think we're lucky, frankly. I think we're lucky that we have not had a bigger downturn in the economy than we have. I don't think this was the Fed being smart as much as it was. I think we got a little lucky.
Well, hold on, wait. I'm sorry. Again, isn't this a two-sided thing? No, like higher interest rates can also cool off an economy and cool off inflation as well. No.
Well, that is what they did. Okay, it does. That's what they did. That's why we've had higher interest rates than we've had in 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these high interest rates. What they do is, yes, they cool down. But remember, they also cool down investment. So they've had a huge impact on the supply of housing. Huge impact. The housing is not being built. Why is that? Well, because the interest rates are so high. And why are the interest rates so high? It's not that 5% is a bad interest rate. I mean, I grew up, when I bought my first house, it was 16%. That was bad. Okay, so historically 5% is an average rate. What's bad is when you go from 2% to 7% in a year and a half. That's what's bad, because you put such a jolt to the economy that you have an enormous risk. I think we got lucky. But you put that enormous risk to the economy. And so inflation pressure, and the other thing is yes, inflation's come down, but prices haven't come down from where they were 2 years ago.
Sure, but prices
just aren't going up as fast.
Yeah, well,
the average person is
to be clear,
feeling the inflation.
Yeah, there's still inflation will be cumulative. The rate, it's never going to deflate, right?
Right. It's not going to deflate.
Sure. And then also just to revisit, okay, so according to the for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, for the debt that these two presidents accumulated, Donald Trump's non-COVID spending was $4.8 trillion. The CARES Act and then COVID relief that he provided was $3.6 trillion. Biden's The American Rescue Plan was $2.1 trillion. His non-COVID debt was $2.2 trillion. Trump spent like crazy.
No, that $2.2 trillion. The deficit this year is $2 trillion. 1 year.
This was something released by the Trump and Biden on the national debt. This came out June 24th, U.S. Budget Watch, 2024, I guess. But
I can't speak to it because if you look at what the deficit is through September for the fiscal year ending September is right around $2 trillion. So I'm not sure how they come up with 2.2 over 4 years, non-COVID.
Well, and I appreciate this dialogue.
I just don't know the answer.
What is your guys' thoughts on the national debt? Because it seems like both parties aren't talking about it, or they're kind of talking about it, but no one's really taking it seriously.
Well, this is one place where I think Dustin and I are going to agree.
Well, it's just one of those things that no one's talking about.
I honestly think I am scared for my grandchildren because of the national debt. So there's only two ways.
So what's the solution? Because it's raise more money, which
it's probably a combination. Honestly, it's a combination of raising more money and spending less. It's both. You have to do both. You can't do just one. You can't just reduce spending. You can't just increase taxes. It won't work. You've got to do some combination of them. And I'm not. You'll be shocked at this, Caleb. I'm not opposed to, let's say, a surtax on somebody making over $5 million. They're not going to miss it. It's not. I don't think that 5%. So
you want to explain what that is?
Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton proposed a surtax on people making over $10 million. I think it was a 4 or 5% surtax. I have no issue with that. I actually think that's fine. There's a revenue raiser right there. Okay, it's just another tax rate. It's a surtax. Okay, it's not a tax on investment. It's just a tax on income. So it doesn't single out investment. which is the important thing. And it didn't apply to capital gains. It only applied to ordinary income. So I don't have an issue. I have no question. We need to raise some revenue, but we also need to reduce expenses. One of our challenges, of course, and this is a question I have for you, Destiny, is are you concerned, because you seem to be concerned about the national debt like I am. Do I have that right? First of all, are you concerned about the national debt?
I'm not concerned about the conversation about the national debt because I feel like the conversations around it are just really bad. The issue is that, if you ask somebody, what is or I guess I could ask you, how much debt should the United States have?
I have no idea.
Okay. That's a better answer. That's good. Okay. Because a lot of people will say zero, which is not true, right? You always want to be...
That's not true. And if you look at Japan, they're at 200% of GDP. They're not failing.
Sure, yeah. So I don't know what the ideal debt should be. It should probably be some percentage of GDP. I do think we are spending a lot, and we've added a lot recently. But I guess the thing that's confusing to me that I don't understand about conservatives is if we talk about the debt and they talk about their concerns for the debt, like you said, you either have to raise more money or spend less money. And, people can sit here and talk about the budget, but a lot of people, when they talk about the budget, they're only talking about the discretionary spending, which is what,
right.
30% of the federal budget?
Very small percentage.
Yeah, we're not even talking about non-discretionary. What, are you going to have Republicans cutting, right, like Social Security? Yeah, that's not happening. So
nope.
I guess the confusing thing is for being so concerned about the debt, it feels like Donald Trump has a platform that would apply an unfathomable amount of upward pressure on things related to inflation. So global tariffs, these are massively inflationary, destructive to consumption and supply chains. You've got mass deportation of labor here, right? You're going to drive up prices, right? You're going to drive up the cost of labor to untenable amounts potentially, right? Which is going to be inflationary. He's talking about pressuring the Fed. He admitted to trying to pressure Powell, right, into keeping interest rates low in his own term. And he says he wants to keep interest rates low when he comes back. He wants to eliminate all these random income taxes, reducing tax receipts. He wants to maintain his prior tax cuts, right? Reducing tax receipts. I don't know where these spending cuts are supposed to come from. He doesn't talk about them ever, and he talks about all these income-reducing cuts, and we have to service interest on the debt. So I just don't know how anybody could ever look at Donald Trump, a guy who spent like crazy when the economy was good, and think that this is the guy that I'm going to choose for fighting the debt and fighting the deficit. Yeah.
So let's going back to the deficit. I agree. I mean, we don't have I don't know what the magic number is. Frankly, I don't think anybody knows what that magic number is. I don't think the smartest economist in the world knows what that magic number is because we've never been here before. This is new territory because it's a worldwide economy. It's not a U.S. economy only. It's a worldwide economy. So you can't say, well, it's like, the Byzantine area or whatever, because that was a country, not a global. My question for you, Destiny, though, is, let's go back to something you brought up at the very beginning, which was the child tax credits, which socially we go, okay, we're all empathetic for that, okay? Especially the child care credit. I'm actually more empathetic for the child care credit than the child tax credit.
Oh, Tom, what's the difference?
The difference is that one's a credit because it's helping you to pay to drop a child off at a daycare center while you go to work, while you be productive, okay? Whereas the other is a credit for the fact of having a child, okay? And has nothing to do with whether you work or not, okay? So that's the difference. My question is, are you concerned, Destiny, and because this is one of my concerns, I'm concerned that you get the child tax credits or earned income credits or these other Harris proposals become entitlements. Because once you give them, it's really hard to take them away. Now, you can give them during COVID and take them away. You can say, oh, that was COVID. That's different. But you give them now, how do you take those away? Because what you're doing is, if you do take them away, you're actually giving that family a decrease in their standard of living. Are you really going to do that? And that just puts more pressure on the deficit. So what do you think about, do you think that they'll become entitlements?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but regardless of if that's true or not, and we could go into the benefits and the pros and cons, I guess, of those credits, all of this would pale in comparison to any hypothetical destruction it would wrought on the economy compared to the global tariffs that Donald Trump is suggesting, which is just, that's like a doomsday scenario.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second, if we can.
Let's talk about tariffs, because this is where
Let's talk about the
I
tariffs.
agree with you,
So right now, today, the U.S. has a severe tax disadvantage to the rest of the world because the U.S. has no value-added tax. So if we export to France, that export gets a value-added tax of 20% tacked on. If we import from France, there's no value-added tax tacked on. So what that means is that the French production has an advantage on their exports over a U.S. export. Now, a tariff is one way.
Wait, can I ask a quick question on that?
Yes.
Because I genuinely don't understand this one. I thought that a value-added tax, I thought that you pay tax when you add value at a part in the production. If I were to export a good to France and they were to just sell it as is, how can they VAT that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You VAT imports, you don't VAT exports. Exports are excluded, imports are taxed. 100%.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. Sure.
Yeah, 100%. So we have that disadvantage. And while I'm not a fan of a tariff being the solution to that, what is the difference in your mind from a 20% tariff on a good coming in from France and a 20% VAT on a good going into France? What's the difference? It's the same number. It's 20%.
I mean, I would have to read more of the comparison for the tariff stuff because I feel like let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, this is my whole thoughts on tariffs. Is we're just increasing the costs. We're indirectly passing down the cost to consumers.
No question. It increases the cost of goods. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's in a way.
There's no question in all of the literature. There's no question that the consumer pays that tariff most of the time.
Well, I think it ends up being split kind of 50-50, right? Ultimately.
I think it's higher than that. I think the consumer pays more of that. Than the producer?
Yeah, because you have to eat some of the cost because the consumer isn't going to eat all of it. But the consumer will end up eating some.
Right. Presumably,
wouldn't one difference be for a tariff that a VAT is going to be applied evenly to everything in your economy, like things that are produced domestically as well? Whereas for a tariff,
correct, and that is the argument for the VAT over a tariff. You hit it right on, and that's why the Tax Foundation doesn't have a problem with VAT, but they do have a problem with tariff. But when you're looking at comparative purposes and you're going, still, we're making it cheaper to buy a French good, a good from France, than the French buy the same good. Perfect example is Boeing versus Airbus. Airbus, no VAT when they send it to the US. Boeing, VAT when you send it to France. That's a perfect example of a competitive disadvantage that we have. And absent us doing a VAT, which is wildly unpopular in the US, they actually tried that during Trump's first term, something similar, a border tax, something like a VAT. It's not popular. Frankly, the only way it would ever be popular is if you eliminated the income tax entirely by repealing the 16th Amendment. And then I think people might be okay with it. But until then, the challenge is, you still do have a competitiveness issue when it comes to goods made in America shipped to France versus goods made in France shipped to America.
Let's walk down this path for a minute.
Sure.
If that is the case, are we not just gaining an advantage by their government spending money to make a good or service cheaper for a U.S. citizen?
For who? An advantage to whom?
So, like, let's say, for instance, if you're talking about,
you are making it cheap. You are saying it is an advantage. It is an absolute advantage to the American consumer.
Yeah. So the argument would be
it's a disadvantage to the American producer.
Well, so the issue that I have with saying it's a disadvantage to the American producer, I would agree with that if our production was hurting. But if we're deploying our capital in more productive ways, then isn't that just a net win for us? Like in the United States, let's say that we make like macro widgets, right? But we don't make any micro widgets. But the micro widgets are what are used to make macro widgets, right? Let's say that we import something from China-stan or whatever, right? And let's say that China is like, oh, we're going to subsidize the fuck out of it and VAT and whatever to make it so we can export you a ton of micro widgets. With your economy, wouldn't you go, okay, well, if you guys want to waste your government spending and tax your citizens and all that to subsidize your shit, then we'll just buy that at reduced cost and we'll just make macro widgets, which is a more productive deployment of capital anyway. Aren't we just like winning from that exchange? Isn't that good? Like, the other hand, it feels like what we're saying is like, hold on, we're not going to let you do that. You're not allowed to fuck your citizens over and give us an advantage. We're going to screw our citizens over too so that nobody wins. And now we're going to bring all this base manufacturing back here. We don't want to make Teslas anymore. We want to make gearboxes and we want to make wheels and we want to make fenders instead. Like, I don't know why. That would be the answer, I guess. I don't understand that, the connection there. Yeah.
If you were saying, well, China's going to give Chinese, they're going to make up for it to the Chinese producer, okay, in order for them, those two to offset, you might have a point. But the U.S. doesn't do that. We don't say, look, Boeing, we're going to somehow reduce your costs by 20% because you're going to have to increase your price by 20% when you send it to France. We don't do that. So maybe if we did some kind of a mechanism like that, maybe you're right. Maybe that would work.
Well, why do we even need to do some kind of?
Well, you were just talking about China. They're incentivizing that, but they're penalizing their producers if they're incentivizing us.
Doesn't it free us up to do more like productive stuff though? Would I be more proud? And this gets into very loaded, like normatively loaded territory because people feel a certain type of way about base level manufacturing, like, oh, I want to make cars again in Detroit and the whatever jobs, right? And I understand to some extent, like there are emotional ties to that, but like people aren't scrambling to buy China's airplanes or Russia's airplanes. They're scrambling to buy F-35s from the United States, right? Elon Musk didn't go to make SpaceX or Tesla.
Right, but there's a reason that they're not scrambling to buy Chinese electric cars, and it's only because of tariffs.
Do you really think that you don't?
Wait, absolutely. Because we actually prohibit it.
You don't
just add tariffs. We don't let them sell their Chinese cars. When was the last time you saw a Chinese electric car in the U.S.?
Do you think that all of the higher level goods that the United States produces, you don't think they're that much better than any other part in the world?
No, absolutely not. No, do you think U.S. cars are better made than Japanese cars?
I don't know if
you think a Chevy is a better made car than a BMW?
I don't think automobiles would be the thing I would would push for.
I'm just looking at an example that is, I think, a pretty relevant and obvious example because cars are one of those things that we make and other countries make.
Sure, but like when we're thinking about like
I will tell you, my wife loves the Hondas and she loves the BMWs. I've never seen her even consider buying a Chevy.
Sure, but when we think about like one of the largest export markets I think we have is related to like information technology and services around services around that. This is something that America does better than the rest of the world, right?
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
And